Но то, что вот этот Алеша известно Болгарии всей.
So I want to talk about this guy that I recently came across, Musa al-Gharbi. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing his name right. So he first appeared on the Blogging Heads YouTube show with Robert Wright in 2018, I believe, is the video, and it was titled something like "Why Trump Won in 2016 and Could Win Again." So he has a very interesting background. He is like Holman Hughes. He is black. He used to be he started out in life, I think, from what I remember, wanting to be a Catholic priest. And eventually he sort of like became, more interested in philosophy. He converted from, he became an atheist like I did. And he had this like interesting observation that, hey, I couldn't be an atheist because I could never truly internalize it. And that's definitely the case for a lot of people, right? Like, if you're an atheist and you're still, as an adult, one of these fucking people that goes online and argues with religious people, like trying to prove that God doesn't exist, like, you're just a lost fucking cause because you've not truly internalized atheism. I think to some degree I have, because the God part of the equation has completely, left my brain. But the part of the equation that hasn't left my brain is, I'm still looking for, some kind of sublimation, right? I found it in art. I found it in like just reading, writing, whatever. My experiences with art are as powerful religious experiences as they were with religion, right? Back when I was a religious kid. And his solution to that was, I guess, maybe he didn't see the same thing as I do in the arts or whatever. His solution was to convert to Islam because he could internalize atheism. So interesting guy. He's sort of, I would say, like a little bit IDW adjacent, but not, that could be done in a bad way or a good way. I think his is in a very good way. He says a lot of stuff that's very unorthodox. So like in this conversation back in 2016 or back in 2018 about 2016, he said, look, I'm a sociologist like these other sociologists. And I went through the same data, and look, I don't see what these other people saw. I did not see racism or sexism being the deciding factors for Trump's 2016 win. What I saw was people essentially just, being tired of the establishment, people being, people like in the NAFTA affected regions, like in the Rust Belt, or at least perceived, affected NAFTA regions in the Rust Belt. We had a similar dynamic, right, in Brexit, where free trade, had the same kind of, eating away at like traditional Labor Party voter coalitions, because people perceive that rightly or wrongly that free trade impacted me negatively, right? If I was like a working class person, and Musa al-Gharbi says economics played a pivotal role in 2016. And I think now, like when you look at like modern, scholarship on this, you see that is in fact the case. And the reason why people didn't want to say it in 2016 is, listen, there needed to be somebody to blame for the loss. Like let's be explicit, right? This is a loss by the Democratic Party, right? Just like with probability spaces, like the reason why I started this out with probability spaces is, this needs to be applied to parties, right? If a party is losing, it's because messaging was incorrect, the candidate was incorrect, perhaps the fundraising was incorrect. We have a special set of circumstances in America where, those that outraise will be the ones that often win, right? Which is another confounding variable. But generally speaking, they needed somebody to blame. Russia was an easy target, obviously. Racism was a target. Feminism was a target. I still know people that, they should know better. They're progressives. They voted for Bernie Sanders. They gave money to Bernie Sanders. And they think that racism, sexism was the deciding factor in 2016. They still believe that. And that's because they are Democrats, right? They voted for Biden this time around. They are hardcore Democrats. What Musa al-Gharbi says was, when he looks through the data, everybody that tells you that this is a fear of like a loss of stature, or it's racism, or it's sexism. Ultimately, the kinds of proxies that they use to measure that, like, they're all proxies that do tend to align with economic well-being. So, white people, it's true, white people do believe that they are getting less than black people, and they are going to be in some way, replaced by black people. And, liberal cultural hegemony does not help that. Not saying that it should help that, but liberal cultural hegemony, right? And hip hop is part of this, right? Like rap is, like, in terms of music, it probably is like, the dominant art form, music form in the world right now. And white people, they see this and they're like, wow, like black people have like the culture, right? They seem to have like affirmative action. They have this, they have that, they have welfare. They more often than not can get Medicaid, whereas like I'm just above like a certain income threshold, but I'm still so poor that, it's bad, but I'm not poor enough for Medicaid, but all of them are, so fuck them. Like white people definitely see losing stature partly through a racialized lens. But if that's the proxy that you're going to lose, like, what is that loss really entail? Like in terms of, for example, something like Medicaid, like if you drop, the Medicare age down to 0, right? Like down to like birth, you're not going to be able to play on those like racial, kinds of animus, through that, like kind of like slanted way, like not through healthcare. If you allow everybody to have like a living wage, let's say, adjusted for inflation, $22 minimum wage. Let's say you do a fucking $25 federal job guarantee. Well, suddenly, black people are the ones that are going to be overwhelmingly joining the ranks for your, federally guaranteed job. And suddenly, for the first time in your fucking life, you're forced to work with black people. You're forced to be with them. You're forced to develop relationships with them, and they're actually positive because they're just as hard workers as you are here, right? They're getting $25 an hour, so you guys can bond over like, hey, look, we're suddenly fucking raking in the dough. We have universal health coverage. We're having this like on the job training. Suddenly, you can't have this kind of racial resentment anymore, can you? So. Anyway, that was that's just a long way of saying this was his commentary in the Robert Wright video in 2018. But he actually wrote this in actually I think it's 2015. No, this one was 2016. So this is before the election. This is June 2016. And he phrases it, why 2016 may be Donald Trump's race to lose. And his subtitle is Election 2016, Demographics Does Not Equal Destiny. Exactly, fucking exactly, right? This is what I've been saying for a long time. And 2020 proved this, right? The reason why I want to talk about this is, he predicted a lot of this stuff pretty well. Not necessarily the outcomes of the elections, because I don't know if he made a call for 2020, but the kind of racial alignments and de-alignments and how things will play out economically, how things will play out in terms of resentment, how things will play out in terms of like seeking a boogeyman, in somebody like Donald Trump. Like he got that very well. So let's look at his commentary here back in 2016 before, anybody was even talking about this kind of stuff. A common narrative this election season is that Hillary Clinton will almost certain triumph over Donald Trump because he's a misogynist and a bigot, and there's simply aren't enough white men as a share of the electorate to allow him to win. While this assumption may be comforting for some, it suffers from two critical errors. First, it turns out that white voters make up a larger share of the electorate than people tend to think. I'm not sure if people think otherwise. I mean, like I know that white voters, like who are going to be on average wealthier, like voting fractured across wealth lines, right? And white people vote more. So many more, in fact, that there is a fairly stable path to victory for Trump, even if he does no better among minorities than Mitt Romney, and even if he suffers among college-educated whites. More on that later. Second, these pundits have been hasty in assuming Trump would not do well with minorities, right? Oof, right? How prescient is that fucking comment in June of 2016, right? Imagine putting that in the liberal media in 2016. Actually, Trump might do better with minorities than every president since like Republican president since Nixon or something. Because, and we're going to get to a list of why that would be. Like, imagine saying that in 2016. Right now, he's trending to not only meet, but to exceed Mitt Romney's 2012 performance with minorities. If he manages to surpass his predecessor by a few percentage points with whites or key minority groups, and especially if he manages to do both, then he will likely be classing up the White House come 2017. And right now, things are looking pretty good, right? So again, remember, back in 2016, even before the grab him by the pussy tape, whatever, even before like his kind of crazier antics from that summer onwards, he was saying that the chances do look pretty good for Trump to win, right? And the reasons that he supplies are he might do better with, perhaps a certain subcategory of whites, or he might do better with minorities, right? Those are his two reasons. And we know exactly what happened, right? At the moment, roughly 10% of African Americans have a positive view of Trump, and another 15% are undecided between Trump and Clinton. At first blush, this does not sound great. Winning between 10 to 25% of the black vote would still mean he's overwhelmingly unpopular with African Americans. However, given that Mitt Romney won a dismal 6% of the black vote, Trump stands to exceed his predecessor by a wide margin. This is a big problem. As Van Jones pointed out, for Hillary to win in November, black turnout would have to at least match 2012's numbers. Do we have to say that black turnout did not match those numbers? Like, we know that, right? And she would have to win 90% of these votes. Right now, it's looking like she might not hit either of these benchmarks. Like, I just wonder why. I wasn't paying attention as much as I should have into like the kind of nitty gritty, I guess, back then. But everybody that was calling the election for Trump, we sort of knew that was reality, right? Like, black turnout would have to at least match 2012's numbers. And this is what we knew. We knew 2008, we had very good turnout, relatively speaking. 2012 dropped. 2014, I said this many times, I'm going to say it again, 2014 dropped to pre-Jacksonian America in lots of places, especially like white areas and minority areas. So we knew like, it would be a kind of like a gamble, right, to say that, is Trump disgusting enough for white people generically and black people, right? Is he too disgusting for them to not turn out, right? Which is, it's a big fucking gamble, wasn't it? It was at least it was a gamble in 2016, especially with somebody as historically unliked as both Trump and Hillary was, right? Trump was number one least liked in like 30 years. Hillary Clinton was number two. So essentially, when you have two almost equally unlike candidates, any kind of like random fucking fluctuation of anything is going to throw the election one direction or the other. Although Trump is staunchly anti-immigrant and routinely blames China for America's decline, he's trending to meet or exceed Mitt Romney's numbers among Asian voters. Interesting. What's perhaps more surprising is that Trump may even outperform Mitt Romney among Hispanics, despite his depiction of most Mexican immigrants as rapists, criminals, and job stealers, or his commitment to build a giant wall between U.S. and Mexico and make Mexico pay for it, or his plan to deport undocumented immigrants. 23% of Latino voters support Trump, with another 15% undecided, putting him on track to meet Romney's 27%. Of course, he exceeded that 27%. A coalition of antipathy. After Mitt Romney's humiliating loss in 2012, the GOP unveiled an autopsy of what they believe went wrong. According to their reckoning, the demography of the U.S. was trending away from their core constituency and towards that of their rivals. If the Republican Party wanted to have a viable shot at the White House going forward, it would need to increase its share of Black, Latino, and millennial voters by increasing outreach with these groups and softening their tone on contentious social issues. Trump's strategy is basically the opposite of that, but here's why it may work. People on both sides of the political spectrum tend to talk and think about minorities as a homogeneous bloc. It is assumed that if a candidate says something bad about immigrants, of course Latinos will be upset. If a politician is bigoted against Muslims, of course black people would disapprove. If a public figure makes insensitive comments about trans citizens, of course women would take umbrage. Turns out this is false, and Trump has been able to peel off many minority voters by appealing to their aversion towards their minority groups. Wow. I wonder if that is ever going to be part. Like eventually it's going to have to be, right? When Republicans start winning more and more a share of minority vote, which will happen and has happened. 2016, 2020 is going to keep happening. Imagine saying, well, actually, black people could be, racist against Hispanics. Hispanics could be racist against black people. Latinos, because, just like we think of Europeans as like this fucking, uniform block that's called Europe, right? This is why the kind of Richard Spencer pan-Europeanism shit is so silly, right? Because, people in Europe don't think of themselves as Europeans. They think of themselves as, I am British, I am Scottish, I am from the Netherlands, I am Russian, especially, oh my God, especially if you're fucking Russian. You don't think of yourself as part of Europe. You're not part of Europe. You're Japan. Japan is closer to Europe, right? Than Russia is to Europe. Japan is closer to Europe than Belarus, right? My home country is. How do you think these fractures play out in America, where you have like so many fucking Latino groups rather than the Latino vote? For instance, many African Americans are critical of immigrants. Yeah, no shit. In fact, many Latinos are unsympathetic towards undocumented immigrants, even from Latin America. They are concerned about border security. They often feel they've earned their place in America and that others should do the same. There are large numbers of black and Latino evangelicals who harbor Islamophobic sentiments. There are even some Hindu Indians who are supporting Donald Trump because of his anti-Muslim rhetoric. This is so, if you are in the world of the liberal media establishment, if you believe the loss of Hillary Clinton was just so, you thought that she would like fucking, inaugurate a completely new America. If you're one of those people, my guess is you probably don't know many black people. And if you do, they're probably not black people that hold these kinds of opinions. You also probably don't know that many Hispanic people. And if you do know Hispanic people, they're probably not the Hispanic people that hold these opinions. How do I know? Because I grew up dating, all sorts of races. I grew up dating Hispanic girls, and I had one girlfriend from like Colombia, and her family, they would say all sorts of shit about Mexicans. They would talk shit about all sorts of, subgroups of this Latino vote, because they're not wedded to the success of Mexicans. They're not wedded to, Mexicans being able to get, citizenship or whatever, right? They might feel a lot how like a lot of white people feel about immigrants, right? Being in places like where sometimes I was the only white person, black people, Hispanic people say much of the same kind of disgusting, fucked up shit that you guys say, right? That's just reality, right? So, and the fact that, and Dan Schneider, like when I did the artifact with Dan last month, was it last month? Yeah, I think it was last month. When we did the custodian's bitch, he had this like a paragraph or maybe it was a line in the book where he was like, I see like all these white people that I work with are just like working class and like dumb and like constantly voting against their core interests. And many of them are just not racist. Many of them are, but many are not. They don't use racist language. They don't seem to harbor any kind of racist thoughts. They seem to be getting along with everybody just as well as anybody else, but they're still voting for Trump. Why? And he had a line that said something like, that's when I knew, right, there was something about the media narrative that the media would never admit to, right? Which is that, right? And this cuts the other direction, right? We have racist Hispanics, we have racist black people, right? And sometimes racist black people could be, racist. They could be if you're living like in New York City and you have black people from fucking Haiti, and you have black people from Jamaica, and you have black people from Africa, right? And you have black people from Trinidad. How you negotiate that is also going to be different. It doesn't matter that they have the same fucking skin color as you. You might have an axe to grind against, the fucking Haitians that moved into your neighborhood, or the Jamaicans that moved into your neighborhood, right? In the same way that anybody has an axe to grind against anybody, it would be just as irrational, but you're going to do it, right? So to assume the demographics is destiny is just silly. Moreover, it's likely that Trump will win a larger share of the LGBT vote than any Republican candidate has. Right? He says that he loves gay people. Right? That's probably enough for some people. Right? Mitt Romney did not message about gay people one way or the other. Donald Trump, at least he fucking went out there. He lied about it. Does he love Mexicans or Hispanics? No. But he's going to fucking take a photo with a taco bowl and say, Happy Cinco de Mayo. I love Hispanics, right? And enough people are going to say, yeah, that sounds legit. He's going to say, I love my LGBT friends. And enough people will say, yeah, that's legit. Mitt Romney, he didn't even denigrate himself. He didn't even fucking condescend to pretend. Trump at least his whole life, right? He's been a performer in that regard. So he's going to do it. So this is not only for his unorthodox positions on gender and sexual minority issues, but also in part, like, think about it this way, like Trump, like, he probably is a rapist, just like Bill Clinton is probably a rapist, but Trump is like to the left of what Bill Clinton was, not only possibly in terms of like legit rape, to the extent that we could say like a leftist is one that would not under any circumstances rape someone, which obviously is not true, but to the extent that we can make that argument, and the policy platforms, right? He's like to the left of Bill Clinton. Let's keep that in mind, right? But also in part due to his hardline rhetoric against radical Islam. LGBT and feminist movements have long been complicit in anti-Islam fervor, a trend which may be exacerbated in the wake of the ISIS-inspired attack on Pulse in Orlando, despite the many voices from the LGBT community who aspire to push back against these reactions. I actually haven't read this myself. I haven't clicked these links. I don't know to what degree gay people have been complicit in what we could term true Islamophobia, not I think you could be anti-Islamic in the same way that you're anti-Christian without being Islamophobic, without saying things Islam is a fucking existential threat to us, which, the only reason you would say that is, you've created this threat, right, out of out of terrorism that is all out of proportion with reality, right? The chances of you ever dying anywhere, right, in the Western world of a terrorist attack is so fucking small. It's just so unbelievably small. It's not even worth it to think about it. So that to make an entire mountain of that would be a kind of Islamophobia, yes. But I don't know to what degree this is true. But beyond the point, I don't want to get too off track. As a matter of fact, Trump's anti-Muslim proposals are actually supported by a majority of Americans. That is also true, right? To the extent that we are an Islamophobic country, to the extent that people have whipped up even Obama saying stuff like, we have to protect Americans. We have to keep America secure. We know that's going to happen with or without that kind of rhetoric, but we know that rhetoric exists because we know that there are enough people in America that feel like there's always this outside threat, right? To some degree, this is going to be fanned by Islamophobia, right? Indeed, many of his espoused views enjoy much wider support than most seem willing to believe or acknowledge. So he asks, does Trump have a white people problem? Which is so to just put this into perspective, I'm not sure if he explicitly gets into this, but, the line that Chuck Schumer was made fun of, I think it was from 2014 or 2015, where he said something like, for every body that we lose in the city, we'll pick up 2 moderates in the suburbs. people gave him a lot of shit about this in 2016 because that didn't work out very well, did it? Right? You basically alienated the minority vote, and in exchange, you try to shore up this suburban white vote that ultimately did not come through for you. But just like Musa al-Gharbi said that, correctly pointed out that, there's been this kind of hollowing out, right, of the middle class. A lot of that is, white people and black people just, dropping through the cracks, right? And instead of moving up from the middle class, they move down. But tons of white people and also other people, actually, they moved up, right? Over or during the Obama economy, they were the people that had stocks, right? They were the people that had white collar jobs. They were the people that had just tremendous fucking increases, in their incomes, like especially if they were like in tech or whatever. But they didn't come out sufficiently in 2016, right? And they did come out sufficiently in 2020, right? Which is why the Chuck Schumer strategy did not work in 2016. Now that we have a boogeyman, it worked in 2020. So Trump's has some significant vulnerability to white voters. There are a few ways to respond to this. First, while Trump's approval rating is lower than Romney's among white female college graduates, this is largely offset by gains with male white and or non-college educated voters. This was the voting bloc that was famously undercounted, undersampled, right? Non-educated, non-college whites by Nate Silver, by the whole like polling industry, right, in 2016, and they try to compensate for it sometimes by overweighing a little bit the white non-college vote, which of course surprise surprise, they fucking missed something else, of course, and it was a miss that it was within a polling error difference, right? That could have handed Trump the White House. Biden was able to withstand that polling error, but a second polling error, if that second polling error was borne out by something like enough mail ballots being thrown out, right? That would have been sufficient to again give Trump the White House. And even among women and those with degrees, what is particularly striking is that Hillary Clinton does not seem to be benefiting much from Trump's alleged unpopularity. True, right? For instance, Trump is down 10 points relative to Romney among college-educated whites, but Clinton is up only 3 points relative to Obama's 2012 performance. Or more strikingly, Trump is down relative to Romney by 9% among white women, but Clinton is only up relative to Obama's numbers by 1% in this demographic, despite being the first viable female presidential candidate in U.S. history. So, it's almost done. Let's just finish. Moreover, there are reasons to believe that Trump's actual support among women and college-educated whites may be underrepresented in polls, which is true. Trump actually did better with women than expected, and he actually won, I think, maybe it was either most white women or most women, period. But he won women, right? One strong piece of evidence to support this conclusion are exit polls from the primaries wherein Trump supporters tended to be both wealthier and more educated than the average American. Finally, while much is being made about the supposedly deep rifts in the Republican Party over Trump, it is important to distinguish the Republican establishment from its voting base. The entire Trump phenomenon is reflective of a deep cleavage between the two. The fact that the likes of Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney, and Lindsey Graham have trouble endorsing Trump indicates virtually nothing about how most Republicans feel. And here's a hint. Most Republicans, because just the nature of, if you're a Republican, the assumption is you're a conservative. What conservative psychology entails is you're going to feel way more loyalty to something like a party than a Democrat would. The reason why Dems are always like fucking flipping out over the green vote or whatever is, liberals aren't fucking loyal. Like they'll be like, they'll fuck around and they'll vote for Jill Stein and they'll get, Trump into office in that regard, right? And by that manner. They're going to fuck around and, that green vote, is going to go to, it's going to go to Ralph Nader, right? And conservatives, like, they are far less willing to do that, right? They're far less willing to say, we're not going to vote for our guy, right? These deep rifts with the Republicans over Trump. I mean, like, Trump completely got, more or less what he wanted, with the exception of, like, to be fair, he was not able to repeal Obamacare because, 10 million people losing insurance, terrible for 2018. Turns out that, to keep it wasn't enough. And terrible for 2020, right? Because by 2020, not only did like 10 million people lose their insurance, like probably many more are going to lose their insurance due to coronavirus, and now like we have a health epidemic as well. This rift, like we all know that, right? There was no fucking, Republican Party rift over Trump. Trump is just like the nasty version of it, right? Trump is the version of it that is liable to lose. Like Trump had a serious shot of losing in 2016, and he's toxic enough to lose in 2020, right? The rift, to the extent that it exists after election day 2016, it's only going to exist to the extent that Trump is a liability in 2020, which but like, who's going to run, right? Who's going to run 2020? You either roll that die or you just fucking get out, period. They rolled that die, and guess what? The election was really close, wasn't it? Anyway, so we're more or less done with that. So that was from 2016. Al-Gharbi had another fucking like hit it out of the ballpark article, right? I think this was what was election? Was it the third? It wasn't the second, right? So this was like before election day. So before election day, Al-Gharbi, he probably thought about like, okay, so this was my analyses from 2016, from 2018. What am I going to say about 2020? Like, is this thing as non-competitive as people are saying, right? Like, is Biden truly like 10 points ahead nationally? I mean, maybe he is, like, when the final popular vote is tallied, but Al-Gharbi was in this article, he was thinking that it's probably a lot closer than people think, which is what I was thinking as well. And Setso, and what do you know? There are plenty of white people and black people, Hispanic people that want to vote for Trump. So the Trump vote is rising among blacks and Hispanics despite the conventional wisdom. So from 2016 to 2020, we're getting a further racial realignment. Okay. So this is how he writes this essay. In 2016, Donald Trump got a lower share of the white vote than the previous Republican nominee, Mitt Romney, and white turnout was stagnant as compared to 2012. White vote, yeah. Trump was able to win nonetheless because he got a higher share of black and Hispanic voters than his predecessor, up roughly 3 percentage points with African Americans and 2 percentage points with Hispanics, helping tilt pivotal races in states such as Wisconsin, Ohio, and Florida, and Pennsylvania toward Trump. It was minorities, not whites, who proved more decisive for Trump's victory. Let's just say that shit again, right? Let's trigger all the fucking shit libs that might be listening to this, and all the Dem machine hacks. So it was minorities, not whites, who proved more decisive for Trump's victory. In other words, it was Trump's inroads with the minority vote, not fucking Jill Stein, not all this other shit, right? Not Russia, not anything. It was minority voters crossing the aisle to vote for Donald Trump that made Donald Trump win the election. Okay, so but there's a reason, right, why Jill Stein is easy to blame, right? Because that's 0.6% of the electorate. You could get fucking shit on because, first of all, they know that you're not a Democrat, so you don't owe shit to them. You're not going to give them money. You're just going to siphon votes from them, and your rhetoric might actually be successful in the long term. So, fuck you, right? We're going to use you as a scapegoat. One thing that they didn't want to do is, I remember like back in 2016, there was like all these tweets and all these people saying shit like, as bad as this election is, we really got to hand it to black women, right? Black women, like, they really try to, like, come out for Hillary Clinton. And I'm not sure specifically what, the share was in terms of women, but one thing Dems weren't going to do, right, and the media wasn't going to do in 2016 was blame black people, right? That's a big no-no, right? You could fucking ignore black people. You could take a big old shit on them. You could, you could make all these promises and then suddenly disappear after the election. But one thing that you're not going to do, especially after you lose, is you're not going to alienate more of the black vote, right? So we're going to alienate as much as we can the green vote because fuck them, but you're not going to alienate the black vote, right? Which is how scapegoating works. Going into election day in 2020, Trump seems poised to do even better with minority voters. His gains in the polling have been highly consistent and broad-based among blacks and Hispanics, with male voters and female voters, the young and the old, educated and uneducated. Overall, Trump is polling about 10 percentage points higher with African Americans than he did in 2016, and 14 percentage points higher with Hispanics. Perceptions of Trump as racist seem to be a core driving force pushing whites toward the Democrats. Why would the opposite pattern be holding among minority voters, i.e. the very people the president is purportedly being racist against? It may be that many minority voters simply do not view some of his controversial comments and policies as racist. Too often, scholars try to test whether something is racist by looking exclusively at whether the rhetoric or proposals they disagree with resonate with whites. They frequently don't even bother to test whether they might appeal to minorities as well. Yet when they do, the results tend to be surprising. For instance, one recent study presented white, black, and Hispanic voters with messages the researchers considered to be racial dog whistles, or coded language that signals commitment to white supremacy. It turned out that the messages resonated just as strongly with blacks as they did with whites. Hispanics responded even more warmly to the rhetoric about crime and immigration than other racial groups. Especially if we're talking about immigrants themselves. First of all, if you're an immigrant here and you're here legally, that bottleneck that I talked about last time, you have made it through the bottleneck, right? So we start with the big old bottle, and you get processed through this little narrow opening, right? And that narrow opening exists only for people that are educated enough, wealthy enough, have enough connections, blah, 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 to actually make it into America, get a green card, become citizens, whatever, right? So if you're an immigrant, they're, and already wealthier to begin with than average, you're probably going to be more conservative to begin with. You're going to say you're going to be one of these people that says well, I did it by my own bootstraps. I was an immigrant here and I had to wait, right? Not taking into account the realities of what, perhaps people that were, in this country legally have to go through. So you might go conservative for that reason, right? So in terms of crime, you don't want to be associated with those Hispanics. If you're here, if you came here in an above board way, right? You have the same, in many respects, the same bourgeois values that, liberals do, right? You may not be consuming the same media, but, you're still bourgeois in that regard. So that is on balance. These racist messages seem to resonate more strongly with minorities than whites. Across racial groups, most did not find the messages to be racist or offensive, despite researchers viewing these examples as clear-cut races of racial dog whistles. And this is important, right? The kind of fucking researcher bias that we've seen in 2016 and into 2020, this is beyond doing these autopsies of both elections. I remember even back in 2016, when Obama was still in office and people thought that Clinton was going to win, Democratic Party aligned economists, they kept saying we have to keep interest rates low, right? And of course, the reason why, Democratic aligned talking heads or economists or whatever, right, might say this is you keep interest rates low. People like that, right? It allows the stock market to keep going up. It allows people to, feel like they could take loans and mortgages out at better rates. But when Trump actually won, all those messages, like, they were actually like in journals and in studies, and like you'd have like economists going Bloomberg saying, like, expecting like a Clinton presidency, and they were like, we need to keep interest rates low. As soon as Trump won, for those last few months, like, of 2016, they kept saying, we have to, pick up interest rates, pick them up, because if you do that, stock market doesn't like it. It hurts Trump. People don't like it. That hurts Trump. So, don't think of these fucking experts as like these dispassionate, disinterested, like, I only care about the truth type people. They're not. Like, they have the same political motivations as anybody else, the same propensity to cherry pick, the same affiliations and desires, right? So all those flaws that you see, like when you retweet some garbage that you probably shouldn't retweet, like that in a lesser, perhaps more controlled way is coming out of the kind of liberal kind of academic class. As I pointed out in 2016, he continues, another key factor for understanding minority support for Trump may be that minorities often hold antipathy toward other minority groups. As a consequence, even if we understand many of Trump's policies and rhetoric to indeed be racist, minorities could support Trump precisely because his rhetoric or policies seem to target other minorities whom they also dislike. Academics generally avoid examining bigotry among members of minority groups. And why is that? Because we've had so much racism coming from whites. We have now overcompensated all the fucking way to the other side, where black people can't be racist, Hispanics can't be racist. Focusing nearly exclusively on anti-minority sentiment among whites. And they often approach politics in intersectional terms. Campaigns to assist Muslims, poor people, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, LGBTQ Americans, women, etc. are viewed as fundamentally interconnected, part of the same overarching struggle for justice and equality. Within this worldview, it would be natural to assume that if Trump says something negative about one minority group, it will likely alienate other minorities as well. However, as a matter of fact, people from historically marginalized or disadvantaged groups often hold very negative opinions of people whom from other minority populations, and do not seem to approach social issues in intersectional terms. Now, I don't know if he explains why, but I have a pretty good idea why that is. Like, there's no reason why this shouldn't be true, right? Like, let's assist Muslims, poor people, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, gay people, women, whatever, right? Like, it's all interconnected. Let's get the same justice. Now, in theory, there's no reason why this shouldn't in fact be the case, right? This should be the case. The problem is, with the way that politics get played in America and the way that functionally all this just ultimately just plays out, what you have is you have a bunch of fucking corporations that are virtue signaling about how much they love gay people, right? And they like have like a gay rock, right? Like a rainbow colored rock that they use to like keep, they would like install like in, I don't know, like, I saw this like a famous image, like this rainbow painted flag that like some company put next to its store just so that homeless people wouldn't like find, a way into that little nook and just sort of like fall asleep there, like to make it too uncomfortable, right? To make homeless people sleep there. So this is how like gay stuff like gets like perceived, or like if you're into gay rights, this is like what you're allied with. Like, if you're for black people, you're for affirmative action, which is nice, but you're not going to like give us Medicare for all, which is going to affect us poor white people. You're not going to give us, you're not going to give us a federal job guarantee. You're not going to do anything for us. So this perception is going to be like this democratic, intersectional politics. It seems to be benefiting like one group of people and not us. And the irony is, of course, it's benefiting overwhelmingly like the super rich, and those that think they're going to vote for Trump because this is not benefiting us. they are correct for thinking it's not going to benefit us, but they're incorrect for thinking that Trump is going to be the guy that's going to, watch out for our concerns. So again, theoretically, there's no reason why we can't have like a broad-based, like intersectional understanding of politics and political action and all that. But unless you create this like fucking like unmovable, right, inert mass of policy where simply cannot be ever taken away. Like if you give universal coverage, like you can't chip away at that, because if you do, people are going to punish you, like when they vote. If everybody has UBI, if everybody has a federal job guarantee, those are things that are very difficult to get rid of. So if white people feel like, we could also get ahead together, rather than like get poor while feeling like everybody else is getting richer and we're not. We could have an intersectional politics, but until we have that, until we have a party that is actually interested in intersectional politics and it's like full logical, rational conclusions and implications, intersectional politics are in some ways pretty toxic, right? Unless you have the boogeyman. Unless we got that boogeyman, and we do have the boogeyman, right? We have that boogeyman named Trump. So to just give examples of this kind of bigotry, for instance, anti-black sentiment is common within many Arab, Hispanic, and Asian communities in the United States. I live in a neighborhood where it's just like overwhelmingly, I think like white people make up 15% of the neighborhood. And when I moved in, it was like a lot smaller than that. I moved in years ago. And everybody around me, they're Asian immigrants, right? They're like, they're either immigrants from India, they're immigrants from Guyana, right? They're immigrants, there are other like non-black immigrants from, my zip code is also very black, but like I guess my street isn't. And I have conversations with neighbors. I have conversations with like local friends, and many of them they like Trump. Many of them were they might be traditional Democratic voters, but they said hardcore like racist fucking shit. Like I remember this one guy that I was talking to, he came up to me and he was like this is like all like during all like the George Floyd protests. And I mean, I find it's pretty funny. It's a very funny story. He wasn't laughing, but I found it very funny. So this one guy that I know, he works as a plumber in Home Depot, and he's Guyanese. Came here like as a fully grown adult. So he's a plumber in Home Depot, and during these like George Floyd protests, he comes up to me, like, I guess like one time, like it was like nighttime. He's like, hey Alex, like I want to talk to you about this. Like, oh, this is all so bad. And I was like, what's bad? He was like, I was working at the store today, and a bunch of black people came in. They loaded up like a cart full of like goods, and they just like proceeded to leave Home Depot without paying. And when he tried to stop them, the black people told him, "It's black people time," which is just so like it's just so funny, because like it's just so fucking like this is exactly like when white people imagine like when white people imagine like what black privilege is. This is the fucking like stereotypical version of that. Like, let's just like forget for a second the fact that the number of black people that would actually be willing to like fill up a cart full of like shit and then use their race as a justification for like stealing shit. That number is like, almost zero. But to the extent that they exist, like it's going to play out. Again, probability space, you have enough resentment. We have racial politics being the way they are. You play out, that simulation 1,000 fucking times. We're gonna get, a black person somewhere that's gonna do something like this. But it's also funny because, like, an immigrant, right, that like came from Guyana as an adult, who had to work to do that. They're sort of, especially growing up, I guess in Guyana, like the black population there is even more disadvantaged here. So, if you're kind of like in any way, above them, economically speaking, you're probably prone to like, negative views. but anyway, like, I'm just giving this anecdote because, like, most white people and most people voting for Democrats and most people that fucking consume media narratives and are in these narratives and want to have these conversations, like, they don't know people like that. Like, they don't know the guy they don't know the Guyanese guy working at Home Depot that sees, like, a black guy stealing from his store and says it's black people time. And they don't understand how these resentments actually would play out in reality, right? So, like just fucking, get out of the house for a second, and see what reality is like out there. For instance, oh, we read that. So anti-Semitism, meanwhile, is significantly more prevalent among blacks and Hispanics than among whites. Again, is that surprising? There is no such thing as, like, anti-German racism, right? And I use this example all the time, but when my great-grandmother was, starving in the USSR during World War II as a child, she blamed Germans, and everybody around her blamed Germans. They weren't gonna fucking say, like, oh yeah, it's the civilians that are it's the civilians that are good, and it's the people in the military that are bad. But not even the soldiers are bad. They're just doing what Hitler's telling them to do. Like, they're not gonna have this fucking perspective. We're talking about peasants in the USSR, right? They're gonna have this, like, widespread fucking bigotry against the people that, they say, like, hey, you're causing us to starve right now. Now, of course, Jews are not causing black people's problems, but, if you have an ethnic group that's, like, doing better, if you have, like, this, like, if, for example, like, you're in any way interested in hip hop, like in the 80s and 90s, and you're very skeptical of the fact that, you have tons of, like, wealthy Jews in the music industry, and they're sort of, giving, rappers, like, bad contracts. And even, like, what's his name from the Third Base, when he said that he was going to sign Nas, like, Nas appeared on Live at the Barbecue before he got signed, which is a main source album that was produced by, I'm not sure if it's, like, both of them from Third Base, but Nas also appeared on, what was the name of the song? Like, whatever, I forget the name of the song, whatever that line is that's, like, pointing automatic guns at nuns or something. He said, like, hey, I see Nas as very talented. He's still, like, a kid. I'm older than he is. I'm not that old, but I'm older than he is. I'm in a more kind of, like, kind of, like, established position. And I'm a Jew, okay? I'm a Jew, but I'm a rapper. I'm respected by other black rappers. I am respected by Nas, that I consider an even better rapper than I am. And if I'm going to, have any sort of, like, financial stake here, I'm going to try to make sure that I don't give him a bad deal. I want him to do well, and I want him to do well for himself, right? In his career, in terms of money, in terms of, like, whatever that he wants to put out. So he was very conscious of that. But again, back to the fucking probability space. We're going to play the simulation 1,000 times. What do you think is going to happen? People are going to get exploited everywhere, not just, by Jews. So, and, obviously, things like in the black neighborhood, you could have, like, jewelry stores, which are, more often than not, white run or Jewish run or whatever. So you're going to get, black people who are on average less educated, less willing to, like, buy into, like, typical liberal, media narratives, are less willing to be shit libs. They're going to have anti-black sentiment, just like anybody would under these kinds of variables and probability spaces. But, talking about that, it's not politically correct. Like, to what extent is it true that somebody like Bernie Sanders might not fully get the black community because there was enough anti-Semitism there, right? Like, if we're going to ask this question about white voters, why can't we ask that question about black voters, right? It's definitely interesting. Anyway, I don't want to go too far here. I think we're kind of close to the end. But my point in bringing all this up is to say that, a lot of these narratives that we've heard, right, about demographics as destiny, that's not true. Okay, a lot of the stuff that you heard about the 2016 vote being racial as opposed to socioeconomic, that's not true. And because I'm constantly poking fun of bad writers and bad thinkers and whatever, for every Coleman Hughes that I'm picking on, I want to talk about people that make sense, right? And I want I think Musa al-Gharbi is good at what he does. I think he's made tons of great points for going back years already, right? So that's that. I'm gonna take a quick break here after I do comments, and then we'll get through the rest of everything here. So let's see what we got. So Dale says, I'm just an average guy, not particularly smart. It's my experience that leftism of that sort harms more than it helps by dividing and dismantling any genuine political action in favor of managerial and bureaucratic systems that favor capital. This isn't the place to get into it, but even if the intention is noble, it quickly gets weaponized. Just check out any DSA chapter. I mean, DSA, when I think didn't they endorse Biden or something? Tons of people fell in line, right? We're going to endorse Biden because again, Trump is too disgusting. Like if you're in the DSA, chances are you are an upper class liberal person, right? Adelfried, I haven't read Adelfried, but I've seen some of his stuff. Deal says again, that's because intersectional politics currently exists under the neoliberal capitalist superstructure, where everything is a market commodity and everyone's playing a zero-sum game to maximize profit capital. The Newhouse says, this is blowing my mind. I don't know if you're being sarcastic, Newhouse. I think Newhouse is, from what I could tell, smart enough that he probably understands all of this. Maybe Newhouse could tell us this. If you were living in America, would you have voted for Biden or would you have voted for third party? Because I think you're probably on board with everything that we're kind of more or less saying here. Anyway, I'm gonna take a quick break, eat something quickly, then we'll finish.